who here has something in your life that you'd like to change? I want you to think about what that is. It could be something big, it could be something small. Magnitude doesn't matter as long as it's relevant for you. In the fall of 2006, I had something I wanted to change. In the prior year, I'd gone from being a successful litigation attorney making 6 figures to a failed business owner. I had started a business that was completely unrelated to the law. And when someone in that industry harshly criticized my work, I shrank back, the business withered, and I quit. And proceeded to beat myself up to the point where I hated looking in the mirror. November 2006 found me on the course of a triathlon called Silverman. I didn't know much about triathlon at the time, but I did know that Silverman was an iron distance race, meaning these athletes swim 2.4 miles, cycle 112 miles, and run 26.2 miles, for a total of 140.6 miles. A friend had asked me to volunteer, and I thought, what the hell? Let's do it. Let's see what kind of nut jobs sign up for an event like this. My volunteer spot was on a cold, dark, desolate portion of the run course. It was so dark that one of these portable spotlights had been set up, and it was next to a construction site that the runners actually had to run through. There was a path through there. The spotlight washed the street with light, but could not penetrate that cavernous construction site. It was dark, it was cold, the air was completely still. And other than the athletes running by, I was alone. Alone with the awful voice in my head that had pretty much become my constant companion. And as I watched these athletes run by, I remember exactly what that voice said. It said, why don't I have that kind of desire? Why don't I have that kind of discipline? Why don't I have that kind of drive? Now, the fact that these athletes looked like regular, hardworking people who had set a goal for themselves, because they were, it only served to increase what I would call the worst case of self-loathing I've ever had in my life. If anyone here has felt even half of what I felt that night watching these athletes, you know how incredibly painful and debilitating it is. Which is why I will always be grateful for what happened next. The mean voice in my head had risen to a fever pitch, that whining fever pitch, and it became so loud that it felt like screaming inside my head, until a different voice intervened. And that voice said, do this race. Do the half. I should tell you that Silverman also offered a half iron distance, which is only 70.3 miles compared to 140.6. To this day, I am still grateful that the voice told me to do the half. I was not an athlete when I got this message to sign up for Silverman. I didn't know how to swim. I had never ridden a real bike, and I could barely jog a 5K. I was a formerly successful professional whose confidence had been shattered. So what do you do when you find yourself inside an inciting moment where you realize not only do you want to change, you have to change? And that change is going to require a change in behavior, likely to something that you've never done before. How do you take what is essentially a leap of faith into the unknown? You go from that inciting moment, which is where all great stories start, and you act. And through that action, you begin to build a body of evidence, and that body of evidence becomes your story. All great stories have a structure, and that structure, when permeated with the evidence that you put in there, becomes so strong that it is irrefutable. It gives you strength to, say, withstand criticism of your work and not quit. It gives you a picture that you can paint with words to inspire other people. And it gives you proof that you come through for yourself, no matter what, when times get hard. This is not just my opinion as a writer, a writing trainer, and a writing coach. Stories have been told for thousands of years, and experts have dissected the story structure thousands of times. So here's my take on it. After that inciting moment, you act as soon as humanly possible. So I got off that course, I signed up for the 2007 Silverman Half, and I started training. After acting, you're going to have to deal with obstacles that inevitably come up, especially when you're doing something that has great meaning for you. 2007, I signed up for 5 triathlons, including Silvermen and several shorter races to prepare. Guess how many I finished? 0. I was doing the training. My body was changing, remodeled from the inside out, but I could not pull the trigger when it came to racing. I would either show up, I would get terrified in the open water, and I would quit, or I would simply not start, and I would get what's called a DNS, did not start, worst thing you can do in the sport of triathlon. Obstacles are going to happen, and oftentimes it's not until later when we look back with hindsight and we realize that they actually were there for a reason. They actually were there to teach us something, especially if we are going after something that has true meaning for us. For me, failure after abject failure at racing in 2007, it showed me how much I truly wanted Silverman. The fall of 2007 found me on the Silverman course again as a volunteer, this time on the bike course. And I'm watching the cyclists racing by me, and I'm thinking, you know, Steph, you could quit now, and no one would blame you. Absolutely no one would blame you. You tried. 5 races. You just couldn't do it. You know, it's not the sport for you. Go try something else. And part of me bought into this too. It is a very logical argument, and it's reasonable under those circumstances. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. The pull of Silverman was so strong that it was irrefutable. The pull of Silverman was stronger than any mere thought of giving up. But something did need to change, which leads me to the third part in the story structure. You act, you face obstacles, and you get support, because no protagonist creates a story in a vacuum. I needed different support. I needed a different coach. Someone who could help me deal with this. I had been reading the blog of a coach for over a year, and I knew that if she took me, she could help me turn things around. And I'll never forget that first conversation I had with her, standing in my driveway on a cold, dark night, and I knew that everything would change. And it did, almost instantly. 2008, 5 races signed up for. Guess how many I completed? 5. With the right support and the pull of something that means more to you than mere words can say, you're unstoppable. So you keep the cycle going. You act. You face your obstacles, you get support. You act. You face those obstacles, you get support. And you keep doing that until the story reaches its natural conclusion. When I arrived at the Silverman start line on November 8th, 2008, I was more prepared for that race than I was for any event in my whole life, ever. And crossing the finish line was a cherry on top of the hugest chocolate sundae that you have ever seen assembled. It was the best feeling in the world. So you might be thinking, Steph, this is great. This all sounds great. But I don't have anything in my life like Silverman, and I don't want to do that. And that's great. That is great because the evidence that can be found in stories for you, it doesn't have to be your own story. You can find evidence in stories from other people's lives, from talks like this, or from fiction. It's amazing where you can find the evidence to build your story. I had no evidence of my own on that cold, dark night in November of 2006 that I could do anything like Silverman. So I turned to something that I had been doing since I can remember learning how. I started to read. I discovered blogs. They were kind of new back then still. And I discovered that there were athletes out there just like me, some pure beginners like me, some with confidence problems like me, writing about their training and their racing. So I was like, whoa, this is so cool. So I did the other thing that I naturally do since I learned how. I started to write myself. I started a triathlon blog where I wrote about my training. I wrote about Silverman and years beyond that. And I discovered this whole online community, these people that I had never met. And people started commenting on my blog, and I started commenting on their blog. And I wrote and read and commented and wrote and read and commented. And as I was doing this for the 2 years leading up to Silverman, I didn't realize it at first, but I was building the platform for the new business that I would start 2 months after finishing Silverman. And I did start another business. And this time it was a writing business where I help other businesses get their message out there online. Because these days, you do need the writing, and you do need the tools, and you do need the strategy. And all that is very important. But you need more, especially if you're a small business owner trying to make it online. You need much more than that. You need the intangibles. You need a strong point of view. You need a perspective on your industry that's uniquely yours. You need an opinion, and you need to be willing to voice it. But where do you get all that? From the body of evidence you've been building your whole life, from your story. That's where you get it. I had a client send me an email last year, and it really, really hit home with me. She had originally hired me to write a white paper for her. And she sent me an email, and she said, Steph, what you do really well for me is you help me listen to myself and trust that. Isn't that just the crux of it all? Listen to yourself. when you are inside of an inciting moment. Maybe you're in one right now. What crossed your mind? What crossed your heart when I asked, what is it in your life that you want to change? That is an inciting moment for you. Act on it as soon as humanly possible. Act on it. And tell your story, because people need to hear it. Thank you.